After 3 years in military, I returned to surprise my 12-year-old daughter. But when I walked into the house, I saw her on her knees cleaning the floor, bruises all over her arms, wearing a filthy apron that said Hamilton Family Made. And what I did next. But before I begin, please like and subscribe to the channel. And we'd love to hear which part of the world are you joining us from. Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. The wheels of the commercial flight touched down with a hard jolt that rattled the overhead compartments. Kevin Rourke kept his eyes fixed on the seat back in front of him, jaw tight, hands gripped on the armrests. 3 years, 1,095 days since he'd walked out that door in his desert fatigues, kissed his daughter's forehead, and promised he'd be back before she knew it. Ruth had been 9 then. Small hands, gap-toothed smile, a pink backpack with cartoon characters he couldn't name. Now she was 12. The plane taxied toward the gate, and Kevin felt his pulse quicken. Not the adrenaline rush of incoming fire or the cold focus of a mission brief. This was different. This was the nervous energy of a man who'd spent 3 years imagining a homecoming that never quite materialized the way he'd hoped. He tried calling last week. The number went to voicemail. He'd sent an email. No response. Finally, he'd just decided to surprise them. Show up at the door with his duffel bag, and that grin Judy always said made her weak in the knees. The airport smelled like recycled air and burnt coffee. Kevin moved through the terminal with the efficient stride of someone who'd learned to carry weight without showing it. His duffel hung from one shoulder, lighter than it should have been after 3 years of service. He'd left most of his gear behind, shipped the rest. All he wanted now was to see his family. The rental car was a bland silver sedan that smelled faintly of air freshener and previous occupants. Kevin drove through the outskirts of Ashwood Springs with the windows down, letting the Virginia humidity wash over him. The town hadn't changed much. Same gas station on the corner of Route 9. Same diner with the peeling red paint. Same park where he'd taught Ruth to ride her bike without training wheels. But as he turned onto Maple Drive, something in his chest tightened. The house looked wrong. Kevin slowed the car to a crawl, eyes scanning the property he'd bought 8 years ago with money saved from 2 deployments and a modest inheritance. The lawn was a mess of overgrown grass and weeds that reached halfway up the porch steps. The flower beds Judy had once obsessed over were choked with dandelions and dead stems. The white siding was streaked with grime, and one of the shutters hung at an angle, held by a single screw. He pulled into the driveway and killed the engine. For a moment, he just sat there, hands still on the wheel, staring at the house. The porch light was broken. Not just off, broken. The glass fixture dangled from exposed wiring, swaying slightly in the breeze. Kevin got out slowly, closing the car door with a soft click. His boots crunched on gravel as he approached the front steps. The mailbox was overflowing, envelopes spilling out onto the ground. He bent down, picked one up. It was addressed to him. A credit card offer from 2 months ago. 2 months of mail. Uncollected. He climbed the steps carefully, testing each board before putting his full weight on it. The wood groaned. The welcome mat was filthy, covered in mud and leaves. Kevin reached for the doorknob and found it unlocked. He pushed the door open. The interior was dark despite it being early afternoon. Every curtain was drawn tight, blocking out the sunlight. The air inside was stale and thick, carrying the smell of old takeout and something sour he couldn't quite place. Kevin stepped inside and let his eyes adjust to the dimness. The living room was a disaster. Fast food containers littered the coffee table. Empty beer cans were stacked in a pyramid on the side table. The couch cushions were stained and crooked. A pair of men's work boots sat by the door, caked in dried mud. Men's boots. Size 12, maybe 13. Not his. Kevin moved deeper into the house, his training kicking in automatically. He scanned for threats, for movement, for anything that didn't belong. The hallway was cluttered with boxes and garbage bags. The walls had scuffed marks and dents. A picture frame lay face down on the floor, glass cracked. He picked it up. It was a photo of him and Ruth at the beach. Her in a yellow swimsuit, him lifting her onto his shoulders. Both of them laughing. The glass had a boot print pressed into it. Kevin set the frame down carefully and continued forward. That's when he heard it. Scrubbing. The rhythmic sound of a brush against tile. Coming from the kitchen. He moved silently down the hall and stopped at the kitchen doorway. What he saw made his blood turn to ice. Ruth was on her hands and knees in the middle of the kitchen floor, scrubbing in tight circles with a worn sponge. Her hair, longer now and pulled back in a messy ponytail, hung forward over her face. She wore old jeans with holes in the knees and an oversized t-shirt that looked like it hadn't been washed in days. And over the t-shirt, tied tight around her thin frame, was a bright yellow apron with words printed across the front in large black letters, Hamilton Family Made. Kevin's vision narrowed. His hands curled into fists at his sides. Ruth's shoulders were shaking. He realized she was crying, silent tears dripping onto the floor she was scrubbing. Her hands moved in quick, desperate motions, as if she was afraid of what would happen if she stopped. Ruth! Her head snapped up. The sponge fell from her hand and landed with a wet slap on the tile. For a moment, she just stared at him, eyes wide and glassy with tears. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. Then she covered it with both hands, as if afraid to make sound. "Baby," Kevin said, his voice cracking despite his best efforts to keep it steady. "It's me. It's Dad." Ruth's entire body seemed to crumple. She let out a choked sob and started to stand, but her legs gave out halfway up. Kevin crossed the distance in 3 strides and caught her, pulling her into his arms. She was so much lighter than he remembered. Too light. He could feel her ribs through the thin fabric of her shirt. "I'm sorry," she whispered against his chest, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I'm sorry, I was supposed to finish before he got back. I'm almost done, I promise. I just need 5 more minutes." "Hey!" Kevin pulled back enough to look at her face. "You don't have to apologize for anything. You hear me? Nothing." Ruth's eyes darted toward the doorway behind him. "But he said—" "I don't care what he said." A door slammed somewhere in the house. Heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway. Kevin turned, positioning himself between Ruth and the doorway. His hand instinctively moved to his hip, reaching for a sidearm that wasn't there. Old habits. A man appeared in the doorway. Mid-30s, maybe. Stocky build going soft around the middle. Wearing a stained white undershirt and jeans that hung too low. His face was flushed, probably from exertion or drinking or both. He had a can of beer in one hand and a look of irritation that deepened when he saw Kevin. "Did she finish yet?" The man growled, not even looking at Ruth. His eyes were fixed on the floor, searching for whatever imperfection had earned his ire this time. Kevin felt every muscle in his body coil tight. "She's done for the day." The man's eyes snapped up. He frowned, his thick eyebrows drawing together in confusion and annoyance. "Who the hell are you?" "My name's on the mortgage." For a moment, the man just blinked. Then understanding dawned, followed quickly by something that might have been alarm. He took a step back, his free hand coming up in a gesture that was half defensive, half dismissive. "Oh, Kevin, right? Judy said you weren't supposed to be back for another month. Plans changed." The man tried for a smile. It didn't reach his eyes. "I'm Troy. Troy Hamilton. I'm a friend of your wife's. Get out of my house." Troy's smile vanished. "Now hold on a second. I'm not asking twice." Troy's jaw worked like he was chewing on words he wanted to spit out, but couldn't quite manage. He glanced past Kevin at Ruth, who had pressed herself against the counter, making herself as small as possible. Then he looked back at Kevin, seemed to measure something in the man's stance and expression, and apparently decided discretion was the better part of valor. "Your wife's going to hear about this," Troy muttered, backing toward the doorway. "I'm counting on it." Troy disappeared down the hall. A moment later, the front door opened and slammed shut. Kevin waited until he heard a car engine start and fade into the distance before he turned back to Ruth. She was trembling, her arms wrapped tight around herself. "Come here," he said softly. She came to him like a drowning person reaching for a lifeline. He held her while she cried, one hand stroking her hair, the other pressed firm against her back. Over her head, he stared at the filthy kitchen, at the pile of dishes in the sink, at the mop bucket in the corner, water gone gray with grime, at the apron she was still wearing. "How long?" he asked quietly. Ruth sniffled. "Since you left. 3 years. 3 years of this." The front door opened again. Different footsteps this time. Lighter. Hesitant. Troy, did you move your truck? It's blocking the... Judy appeared in the doorway and stopped dead. She looked different. Her hair was styled in a way Kevin didn't recognize, dark roots growing out beneath expensive highlights. She wore a designer blouse that still had the tags tucked into the collar and jeans that probably cost more than his entire deployment wardrobe. Gold hoops hung from her ears. Her nails were done in some kind of intricate pattern with tiny gems embedded in the polish. But her face went pale when she saw him. Her lips parted in surprise, then pressed together in something that looked like calculation. Her eyes flicked from Kevin to Ruth to the apron to Kevin again. "You're home," she said finally, her voice taking on that sickly sweet tone she always used when she was trying to smooth over a situation. Early. Kevin didn't move, didn't smile, didn't do anything except stare at her with a flat, emotionless expression he perfected over 3 years of dealing with hostile negotiations and interrogations. "Get your things," he said. "You're leaving." Judy blinked, laughed, a high, nervous sound. "What?" "Kevin, don't be ridiculous. I know this looks bad, but if you just let me explain..." "There's nothing to explain." He kept his voice level, calm, the same tone he'd used to talk down aggressors who were one wrong word away from violence. "I want you out of this house in the next hour. You can't just throw me out." Judy's voice rose, the sweetness dissolving into indignation. "This is my home, too. We're married. You can't. Watch me." Judy opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Her eyes darted around the kitchen as if looking for an ally or an escape route. Finding neither, she tried a different tactic. Her expression softened. She took a step forward, hands raised in a placating gesture. "Kevin, honey, I know you're upset, and you have every right to be, but Ruth has been difficult lately, and I was just trying to teach her some responsibility. That's all. Troy was helping me out while you were gone, and maybe we got a little comfortable with the arrangement, but that doesn't mean..." "She's 12. Kevin's voice dropped to something barely above a whisper, but somehow that made it more terrifying than if he'd shouted. "She's 12 years old, and you had her scrubbing floors in a maid's uniform. It was just chores. Every kid does chores. Not like this." Judy's face flushed red. "You've been gone for 3 years, Kevin. 3 years. You have no idea what it's been like raising her alone, dealing with her attitude, her constant..." "Mom, please." Ruth's voice was so small it barely registered. She'd shrunk back against the counter again, tears still streaming down her face. Judy whirled on her. "This is your fault, you know. If you just done what you were supposed to do, without all the crying and complaining, none of this would be happening right now." That was the moment Kevin decided he was done with this conversation. "Ruth," he said quietly, "go pack a bag. Just the important stuff. We're leaving in 10 minutes. Ruth hesitated for only a second before nodding and hurrying out of the kitchen. Her footsteps echoed up the stairs. Kevin and Judy stood in the kitchen, facing each other across a distance that felt like miles. "You can't do this," Judy said, but there was uncertainty in her voice now. "Fear, maybe. You can't just take her. I'm her father. I'm her mother." "Then you should have acted like it." Kevin turned and walked out of the kitchen. He heard Judy following him, her voice rising in pitch and volume as she listed grievances and accusations and threats. He tuned her out. He learned a long time ago that people like Judy only got louder when they realized they were losing control. He climbed the stairs and found Ruth's room. The door was open. Inside, his daughter was shoving clothes into a backpack with shaking hands. Her room was barely recognizable. The bed was a bare mattress, no sheets or comforter. The walls were empty, posters torn down, leaving behind tape residue and small holes. Boxes were stacked in the corner, and when Kevin peered inside, he saw tools and spare car parts and fishing equipment. Troy's storage space. Ruth looked up at him, tears still flowing. "I'm almost ready. Take your time." Kevin knelt down beside her. "Is there anything else you want to bring? Anything important?" Ruth shook her head, then paused. She reached under the mattress and pulled out a small photo album. "Just this." Kevin took it gently. Inside were pictures of the two of them. At the park, at the zoo, at her 9th birthday party, right before he deployed. Every photo had been carefully preserved in plastic sleeves. "Good choice," he said, handing it back to her. Judy appeared in the doorway, breathing hard. Her hair was disheveled now, the careful styling coming undone. "You're making a mistake, Kevin. A huge mistake. I'll call the police. I'll tell them you're kidnapping her." Kevin stood slowly. "Go ahead." Something in his tone must have gotten through to her, because Judy took a step back. Kevin moved past her, one hand on Ruth's shoulder, guiding her out of the room and down the stairs. At the front door, Kevin paused and looked back at his wife. She stood at the top of the stairs, gripping the banister with white knuckles. "I'll be back for the rest of her things," he said. "Don't touch them." Then he and Ruth walked out into the afternoon sunlight. The Sunset Motel sat on the edge of Ashwood Springs, a low-slung building with a flickering neon sign and parking spaces marked by faded yellow lines. Kevin pulled into a spot near the office and killed the engine. Ruth hadn't spoken during the drive. She just sat in the passenger seat, clutching her backpack to her chest and staring out the window with red, swollen eyes. "Wait here," Kevin said gently. "I'll get us a room." The office smelled like cigarettes and cheap air freshener. An elderly man with an impressive mustache looked up from a small television showing a baseball game. "Help you? Need a room for the night. Maybe longer. Double or single?" "Double." The man squinted at him. "You in some kind of trouble?" Kevin almost smiled. "No, sir. Just came home early." The man seemed to understand something in that. He nodded slowly and pulled out a registration card. "Room 12. Quiet end of the building. Got a good lock on the door." "Appreciate it." 10 minutes later, Kevin was unlocking the door to a clean but dated room with 2 beds covered in floral comforters, a small television bolted to the dresser, and a window that looked out over the empty pool. Ruth stepped inside and stood in the middle of the room, still holding her backpack. "You can take either bed," Kevin said, setting his duffel down. "I'm not picky." Ruth chose the one nearest the bathroom. She sat on the edge and finally set her backpack down. Her hands were shaking. Kevin pulled a chair over and sat across from her. "Ruth, I need you to talk to me." She looked down at her lap. "About what?" "About everything. All of it. From the beginning." For a long moment, Ruth didn't speak. Then, slowly, haltingly, it all came pouring out. It had started small. Right after Kevin deployed, Judy met Troy at a bar downtown, and he'd started coming around. At first, he was just there in the evenings, drinking beer and watching TV. Then he was there overnight. Then he never left. "Mom said I had to be respectful," Ruth whispered. "She said Troy was helping us out financially, and the least I could do was keep the house clean." Kevin's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Let her continue. The chores had grown more demanding. Dishes, laundry, scrubbing the bathroom, mopping the floors. At first, it was just after school. Then it was before school, too. Ruth would wake up at 5 in the morning to clean the kitchen before Troy woke up, because he hated seeing a mess first thing. "If I forgot something," Ruth said, her voice barely audible, or if I didn't do it right, Troy would yell. And Mom would say I was being lazy or disrespectful. She'd take away my dinner or make me wake up even earlier the next day. Kevin felt something cold and sharp settle in his chest. "Did he ever touch you, Troy, or your mother?" Ruth shook her head quickly. "No, not like that. Troy just yelled. Mostly he ignored me unless he needed something. And Mom, she just stopped looking at me. Like I wasn't even there unless I messed something up." The emotional neglect somehow felt worse than physical violence. At least with violence, there were marks, evidence. But this slow erosion of a child's sense of worth and safety, that left scars you couldn't see. "What about school?" Kevin asked. "I tried to tell a teacher once." Ruth's voice cracked. "Mrs. Patterson. She asked why I looked so tired all the time. But Mom found out and she got really angry. She told me if I ever said anything again, she'd send me to live with Aunt Marie in Texas, and I'd never see you again when you came home." Kevin reached out and took Ruth's hands in his. They were rough and dry, the hands of someone who'd spent too much time in cleaning chemicals and not enough time being a kid. "I'm home now," he said firmly. "And I promise you, Ruth, I swear to you on everything I am, this will never happen again." Ruth's face crumpled. She fell forward into his arms and sobbed, deep, wrenching sounds that seemed to come from somewhere ancient and wounded inside her. Kevin held her and let her cry, one hand stroking her hair, the other rubbing small circles on her back. "You're safe now," he murmured. "I've got you. You're safe." They stayed like that until the sun set, and the room grew dark except for the light from the parking lot filtering through the curtains. Eventually, Ruth's sobs quieted to hiccups and sniffles. Kevin got her a glass of water from the bathroom and found a pack of tissues in his duffel. "Are you hungry?" he asked. Ruth nodded. They walked to a diner 3 blocks away, a place called Betty's that Kevin remembered from before. The waitress was different, but the menu was the same. Ruth ordered pancakes and scrambled eggs, even though it was nearly 8 o'clock. Kevin ordered coffee and a burger he didn't really want, but figured he should eat anyway. Ruth ate slowly at first, then with increasing speed, as if she'd been running on empty for too long, and her body finally remembered what real hunger felt like. Kevin watched her and felt a fresh wave of anger at Judy, at Troy, at himself for being gone when his daughter needed him most. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. Ruth looked up, syrup on her chin. "For what?" "For not being here. For not knowing." She shook her head. "You didn't know? How could you? Mom made sure I sounded happy whenever you called. She'd stand right there and listen to everything I said." Of course she did. They finished their meal in comfortable silence. When they got back to the motel, Ruth took a long shower. Kevin sat on his bed with his phone, staring at the string of unanswered texts from Judy. "What did you take her?" "This is kidnapping. I'm calling a lawyer. You can't do this. She's my daughter too." Kevin deleted them all without responding. Tomorrow he'd deal with lawyers and custody and documentation. Tonight, he just needed to make sure his daughter slept safely for the first time in 3 years. When Ruth emerged from the bathroom in clean pajamas, her hair damp and her face scrubbed clean, she looked younger. More like the 9-year-old he'd left behind. "Dad," she said as she climbed into bed. "Yeah. Thank you." Kevin's throat tightened. "You don't have to thank me for being your father." Ruth smiled. Small but real. The first genuine smile he'd seen from her all day. "Good night, Dad." "Good night, sweetheart." Kevin lay in his bed, fully clothed, staring at the ceiling and listening to Ruth's breathing gradually even out into sleep. His mind was already working, cataloging information, making plans, calculating moves, and counter-moves like pieces on a chessboard. Judy had made a mistake. She'd gotten comfortable, complacent. She'd assumed Kevin would come home grateful just to have a wife and a house to return to. She'd assumed he wouldn't notice, wouldn't care, wouldn't do anything about it. She'd assumed wrong. Kevin had spent 3 years in hostile territory, learning to read situations and people with a precision that kept him alive. He knew how to gather intelligence. He knew how to plan operations. He knew how to execute with ruthless efficiency. And most importantly, he knew how to win. Tomorrow, he'd start asking questions, talking to people, building a case, not just for the lawyers and judges, for himself. He needed to understand exactly what had happened in this house while he was gone. Every detail, every witness, every piece of evidence that would prove what Judy had done. And then he'd dismantle her life with the same cold precision she'd used to dismantle their daughter's childhood. Kevin closed his eyes. Tomorrow, the real work began. The next morning, Kevin woke early from habit. The sky outside was still gray with pre-dawn light. Ruth was still asleep, curled on her side with one hand tucked under her pillow. He showered quickly, dressed in jeans and a plain black t-shirt, and slipped out to grab coffee and breakfast from a gas station down the road. When he got back, Ruth was awake, sitting up in bed with her hair sticking up in all directions. "Morning," Kevin said, holding up a bag. "Got you a donut and some orange juice." They ate breakfast while watching the local news on the small television. Ruth seemed calmer this morning, some of the tension gone from her shoulders. She even laughed at a commercial for a local car dealership with a terrible jingle. "So what happens now?" she asked as Kevin collected the trash. "Now I make some calls, talk to some people, get things sorted out. Are we going back to the house?" "Not yet. Not until I'm sure it's safe." Ruth nodded, accepting this without question. Kevin wondered if she'd learned not to ask too many questions over the past 3 years. Another thing to add to the list of damage he needed to repair. He stepped outside to make his first call. The morning air was humid but pleasant, carrying the smell of cut grass from somewhere nearby. He dialed a number he'd memorized years ago. Morrison Law Offices. This is Kevin Rourke. I need to speak with Jack Morrison. One moment, please. Jack Morrison had been Kevin's lawyer when he'd bought the house. A good man. Fair. Direct. The kind of attorney who didn't waste time on pleasantries when there was work to be done. Kevin? That you? It's me. Heard you were deployed. When did you get back? Yesterday. That's great. Welcome home. What can I do for you? Kevin laid it out in clean, concise terms. The state of the house. Troy Hamilton. The way Ruth had been treated. Judy's reaction when he'd taken Ruth away. Jack was silent for a moment. Then, how much evidence do you have? Photos of the house. I documented everything before I left. Ruth's testimony. I need to find witnesses. Neighbors. Teachers. Anyone who saw what was happening. Okay, first things first. We need to file for emergency custody immediately. Like today. Can you come to my office this afternoon? I'll be there. Good. Bring Ruth. The judge will want to hear from her, but I'll make sure it's done gently. In the meantime, start documenting everything. Every conversation with Judy, every text message, every witness you can find. Build me a case, Kevin. That's the plan. Kevin spent the rest of the morning driving through Ashwood Springs. First stop was the house. Judy's car wasn't in the driveway. Troy's truck was gone too. The front door was locked. Kevin used his key and went inside. The place looked even worse in the daylight. He took photos with his phone. Every room, every mess, every sign of neglect and decay. In Ruth's room, he carefully packed the rest of her belongings into boxes he found in the garage. Her clothes, her books, the few toys she had left. In the master bedroom, he found evidence of Judy's spending habits. Shopping bags stuffed in the closet, tags still attached. Makeup and perfume bottles covering the dresser, expensive brands he recognized from commercials. Receipts scattered across the nightstand showing purchases from high-end boutiques and restaurants. He took photos of those too. Next stop was the elementary school. Kevin parked in the visitor lot and walked into the administrative office. The secretary looked up with a practiced smile. Can I help you? I'm Kevin Rourke, Ruth Rourke's father. I just got back from deployment, and I need to speak with her teachers. The smile faltered slightly. Oh, Mr. Rourke, we weren't expecting you until next month. Plans changed. Is Mrs. Patterson available? The secretary made a quick phone call. 5 minutes later, Kevin was sitting in a small conference room across from a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and worry lines etched around her mouth. Mr. Rourke, she said carefully, it's good to finally meet you. Ruth has talked about you often. I wish I could say the same. Kevin kept his voice level. I need to know what you've observed about my daughter over the past year, particularly the last few months. Mrs. Patterson folded her hands on the table. Is Ruth okay? She is now. Please, anything you can tell me. The teacher took a breath. Ruth has been struggling. Her grades have dropped significantly. She falls asleep in class almost daily. She's lost weight. Her appearance has been concerning. Sometimes she comes to school in clothes that haven't been washed. I've tried reaching out to her mother multiple times, but Mrs. Rourke has been unresponsive to emails and hasn't attended parent-teacher conferences. Did Ruth ever say anything to you about what was happening at home? Mrs. Patterson's expression tightened. Once, about 6 months ago, she was particularly exhausted, and I asked if everything was all right. She started to tell me something about having to wake up very early for chores, but she stopped mid-sentence and got very upset. She begged me not to call her mother. I tried to press, but she shut down completely. And did you? Call child services. The teacher looked pained. I filed a report, but there was no follow-up that I'm aware of. These things sometimes fall through the cracks, especially when the parent is convincing on the phone. Kevin nodded. He'd expected as much. Would you be willing to provide a written statement? Everything you just told me. Absolutely. By noon, Kevin had visited 3 more of Ruth's teachers and the school counselor. All of them told similar stories. All of them agreed to provide statements. One teacher, Mr. Williams, mentioned seeing Ruth's mother at a restaurant with some guy who wasn't you, and noticing how Judy had been dressed in expensive clothes while Ruth's school supplies were falling apart. Kevin thanked them all and headed to Jack Morrison's office. The law office was in a converted house near downtown, with a creaky wooden porch and a sign hanging from a post. Jack met him at the door. He was in his 50s, with silver hair and the firm handshake of someone who'd spent years arguing cases in courtrooms. "Ruth's inside," Kevin said. "Is it okay if she stays in the waiting room? My assistant will keep her company. She's got a daughter about the same age. They'll get along fine." Inside Jack's office, Kevin laid out everything he'd gathered. The photos, the witness statements, the financial records he'd started pulling from his bank account, showing irregular withdrawals and transfers he'd never authorized. Jack reviewed it all with the focused intensity of a surgeon examining an X-ray. "This is good. Really good. Better than most emergency custody cases I see." The physical evidence combined with multiple witness statements, plus the financial irregularities, this paints a clear picture of neglect and exploitation. "How fast can we move? I'll file the petition this afternoon." Emergency custody hearings usually happen within 72 hours. "But Kevin, you need to understand something." "What?" "Judy's going to fight this. Hard. She's going to hire a lawyer. And that lawyer is going to paint you as the controlling military husband who abandoned his family and now wants to sweep in and take everything. They're going to say you're emotionally unstable from deployment. They're going to make you look like the bad guy." Kevin's expression didn't change. "Let them try." Jack smiled grimly. "That's what I like to hear. Now let's talk strategy." They spent the next 2 hours going over every detail. What Kevin should say on the stand. What questions he'd face. How to present Ruth's testimony without traumatizing her further. Jack was thorough, almost aggressive in his preparation. "One more thing," Jack said as Kevin stood to leave. "This Troy Hamilton character. He's a complication. Legally, he has no claim to anything, but his presence in the home could be used against you if Judy claims he was a stabilizing influence or financial provider." "He won't be a problem," Kevin said quietly. "How can you be sure?" Kevin met Jack's eyes. "Trust me." The lawyer studied him for a moment, then nodded. "All right, I'll file the paperwork. Expect a court date within the next few days." Kevin collected Ruth from the waiting room, where she'd been drawing with Jack's assistant's daughter. On the drive back to the motel, Ruth seemed lighter somehow, as if just being away from the house had lifted some invisible weight. "Dad," she said as they pulled into the parking lot. "Yeah. Are we going to be okay?" Kevin reached over and squeezed her hand. "We're going to be better than okay." That night, after Ruth had gone to bed, Kevin sat in the motel parking lot with his phone. He stared at Troy Hamilton's number, which he'd gotten from the call log on the house's landline. Then he typed out a single text message. "Leave. Now. Today." He hit send and waited. 3 minutes later, his phone buzzed. A reply from Troy. "Who is this?" Kevin typed. "You know exactly who this is. I know where you work. I know where your brother lives. I know every mistake you've made in the last 3 years. Leave Ashwood Springs tonight, or tomorrow I start making phone calls. Your choice." Another minute passed. Then, "Fine. Tell Judy I'm done." Kevin deleted the entire conversation and turned off his phone. Troy Hamilton would be gone by morning. Not because Kevin had threatened violence or broken any laws. Simply because men like Troy were bullies, and bullies folded when someone actually pushed back. 2 days later, Kevin stood in a courtroom that smelled like old wood and floor polish. Ruth sat in the gallery with a social worker, a kind woman named Mrs. Brennan, who'd interviewed Ruth the previous morning in a child-friendly room with toys and comfortable chairs. Judy sat on the opposite side of the courtroom with her lawyer, a sharp-faced woman in a navy blue suit who'd already tried to get Kevin's emergency petition dismissed 3 times. Judy looked different today, subdued. She wore a modest dress and simple makeup, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. The calculated image of a concerned mother. Kevin saw through it immediately. The judge was a stern-looking woman in her 60s named Judge Ramona Porter. She had a reputation for no-nonsense rulings and zero tolerance for parental misconduct. Kevin had done his research. "Mr. Rourke," Judge Porter said, looking over her reading glasses, "I've reviewed your petition for emergency custody. Why don't you tell me, in your own words, what prompted this filing?" Kevin stood. He spoke clearly, without emotion, laying out the facts exactly as they'd happened. The condition of the house, Ruth's treatment, the apron, Troy Hamilton, the financial irregularities. He presented the photographs, the witness statements, the testimony from Ruth's teachers. Judy's lawyer objected twice, but Judge Porter overruled both times. When it was Judy's turn, she painted a very different picture. She was the struggling single mother, doing her best to raise a difficult child while her husband was overseas. Troy was just a friend who'd helped with repairs around the house. The chores were just normal household responsibilities. Ruth had been exaggerating, acting out for attention. Your Honor, Judy's lawyer said smoothly, my client acknowledges that perhaps some of her disciplinary methods were stricter than ideal, but Mr. Rourke's sudden reappearance and his removal of the child from the home, without warning, was traumatic and unnecessary. He could have communicated with Mrs. Rourke first. Instead, he acted rashly and potentially illegally. Judge Porter turned to Kevin. Mr. Rourke? Response. Kevin stood again. Your Honor, I came home to find my 12-year-old daughter on her knees, wearing a maid's uniform, crying while she scrubbed floors in a house that had clearly been neglected for months. I did not act rashly. I acted like a father. The courtroom was silent. Judge Porter looked at her notes, then at Ruth, who was sitting very still in the gallery, hands folded in her lap. Then back at Kevin and Judy. I'm going to hear from the child, she said. Mrs. Brennan brought Ruth forward. The social worker stayed beside her as Ruth took the witness stand. She looked so small up there, her feet barely touching the floor. Judge Porter's voice softened. Ruth, I know this is scary, but I need you to answer some questions for me. Can you do that? Ruth nodded. Did your mother make you do chores around the house? Yes, ma'am. What kind of chores? Ruth's voice was quiet but steady. All of them. Cleaning, laundry, dishes, floors, bathrooms. Every day before and after school. Did she ever punish you if you didn't finish? Ruth hesitated, glancing at her mother. Judy stared back with an expression Kevin couldn't quite read. Ruth looked away. She'd take away my dinner, or make me wake up at 4 in the morning to start early. Judy's lawyer stood. Your Honor, children frequently dramatize. Sit down, counselor. Judge Porter's voice was ice. She turned back to Ruth. Did you feel safe in your home? Ruth's eyes filled with tears. She shook her head. Why not? Because I always felt like I was doing something wrong. And Troy would yell if the house wasn't perfect. And Mom would get so angry if I asked for help with homework or wanted to watch TV. She said I was lazy and ungrateful. Judge Porter let that hang in the air for a moment. Then she asked, do you feel safe with your father? Ruth's whole face changed. She looked at Kevin with something like relief. Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Ruth. You can step down. Mrs. Brennan led Ruth back to her seat. Judge Porter spent a long moment reviewing her notes, the only sound in the courtroom the scratch of her pen on paper. Finally, she looked up. I've heard enough. Mrs. Rourke, your lawyer mentioned that Mr. Rourke's return was unexpected and his actions were rash. But based on the evidence presented and the child's testimony, I find that his actions were not only reasonable but necessary. The condition of the home, the testimony from multiple teachers and school officials, and Ruth's own account paint a clear picture of neglect. Judy's face went pale. Therefore, Judge Porter continued, I am granting Mr. Rourke's petition for emergency custody. Ruth Rourke will remain in her father's care until a final custody hearing can be scheduled. Mrs. Rourke, you will be permitted supervised visitation once weekly, pending a full evaluation by the court. Judy shot to her feet. This is insane. You're taking my daughter away because I made her do chores? Because I had a boyfriend? This is discrimination. This is... Mrs. Rourke, if you continue to disrupt my courtroom, I will hold you in contempt. You had her wear an apron label maid while she scrubbed floors in a house that was clearly unfit. That's not chores. That's exploitation. And if you cannot see the difference, then you have proven my point. Judy's mouth opened and closed. Her lawyer put a hand on her arm, trying to pull her back down into her seat. This hearing is adjourned, Judge Porter said, bringing down her gavel. Kevin felt something release in his chest. Not relief, exactly. More like the confirmation that he'd made the right move, played the right pieces at exactly the right time. He turned to find Ruth, but she was already running toward him, Mrs. Brennan smiling behind her. Ruth crashed into him, and he lifted her up, holding her tight while she cried into his shoulder. It's over, he whispered. You're safe now. From across the courtroom, he could hear Judy's voice rising again, arguing with her lawyer, making demands and threats that no one was listening to. Kevin didn't even look at her. He had what he came for. Kevin carried the last box of Ruth's belongings up the porch steps of the house on Maple Drive. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the overgrown lawn, which Kevin had finally mowed the previous weekend. The place was starting to look like a home again. Inside, he could hear Ruth humming while she organized her new bookshelf in the living room. It had taken 3 trips to completely remove all of Troy's belongings from her old room and reclaim the space. They'd repainted the walls together. A soft blue Ruth had picked out herself. New bedding, new curtains, a fresh start. But first, Kevin had some final business to handle. He set the box down in the hallway and pulled out his phone. There were 17 missed calls from Judy over the past week. He'd ignored every single one. But now it was time. He opened his contacts and found a number for a locksmith. Yeah, I need all the locks changed on my property. Today, if possible. 30 minutes later, a van pulled up and a technician began the work. Kevin watched from the porch, arms crossed, as each lock was rekeyed. New deadbolts, new handles, new keys. While the locksmith worked, a sheriff's deputy pulled up in a marked cruiser. Deputy Martinez was young but professional. He'd been the one to serve Judy the eviction notice 2 days ago. Mr. Rourke. Martinez stepped out of his vehicle. You called about supervising the property retrieval? That's right. She's got 30 minutes to collect her personal items. Everything else stays. Understood. Is she here yet? Not yet. As if summoned by the conversation, Judy's car appeared at the end of the block. She drove slowly, perhaps hoping to catch Kevin off guard, or maybe just delaying the inevitable. She parked on the street and got out, her expression hard. She looked different than she had in court. Harder. The careful mask of the concerned mother had been replaced with something closer to rage barely contained. She wore jeans and a t-shirt, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. Dark circles under her eyes suggested she hadn't been sleeping well. Good, Kevin thought coldly. You can't do this, Judy said as she approached. Her voice was sharp. You can't just lock me out of my own house. Deputy Martinez stepped forward. Ma'am, Mr. Rourke has provided documentation showing sole ownership of this property. The court has granted him full custody of the minor child and has issued a temporary restraining order that requires you to remove your personal belongings within a specified time frame. You have 30 minutes. Judy's eyes blazed. She looked past Martinez to Kevin. This is low, even for you. Kevin didn't respond. He simply gestured toward the open front door. Judy stormed inside. Kevin and Martinez followed at a distance, maintaining what the deputy called appropriate oversight. Judy went straight to the master bedroom and began throwing clothes into garbage bags with violent, jerky movements. You're going to regret this, she said without looking at Kevin. You think you've won? You just made everything harder for yourself. Kevin leaned against the doorframe. I'm not interested in your threats. Where's Troy? She whirled on him. Did you scare him off? Threaten him? Troy made his own choices. Bullshit. Judy threw a shoe at the wall. It left a mark in the fresh paint Kevin had just applied. You chase him away because you're a controlling asshole who can't stand the thought of me being happy. You weren't happy, Judy. You were comfortable. There's a difference. She laughed, a bitter sound. What would you know about it? You were gone for 3 years. 3 years. You have no idea what it was like. You're right. I don't know what it was like. But I know what it was like for Ruth. And that's all that matters. Judy grabbed another bag and shoved jewelry into it. Expensive pieces Kevin recognized from the photos he'd taken. She's a child. She doesn't understand. You're turning her against me. I didn't have to do anything. You did that yourself. I was teaching her responsibility. You were exploiting her. Judy spun around, her face flushed. How dare you, ma'am? Deputy Martinez's voice cut through the tension. You have 15 minutes remaining. Judy's jaw clenched. She returned to packing with furious energy. Kevin watched without emotion, cataloging every item she took. The expensive jewelry, the designer clothes, the electronics she bought with money from their joint account. He didn't stop her. He'd already photographed and documented everything. If she wanted to take things that technically belonged to both of them, that would only strengthen his case in the final divorce proceedings. When the 30 minutes were up, Judy had filled 7 garbage bags and 2 suitcases. She dragged them to the front door one by one, refusing help from either Kevin or Martinez. Her car was too small to fit everything in one trip. "I'll be back for the rest," she said, breathing hard. "You have until 5 p.m. tomorrow," Martinez said. "After that, anything remaining becomes property of the homeowner." Judy glared at Kevin one last time. "You'll regret this. Both of you." Kevin finally spoke. "The only thing I regret is believing you were someone you never were." Something flickered across Judy's face. Hurt, maybe, or just anger that she'd been seen through so clearly. She opened her mouth to respond, then seemed to think better of it. She turned and stalked to her car, threw the bags in the back seat, and drove off without another word. Deputy Martinez waited until her car disappeared around the corner. That went better than expected. Usually there's more screaming. Kevin almost smiled. "She's not done yet. She'll try again. Probably. Keep my number handy. Call if she violates the restraining order." Martinez left, and Kevin returned inside. Ruth stood in the hallway, partially hidden behind the wall, her face pale. "Was that Mom?" "Yeah." She sounded really angry. Kevin knelt down in front of her. "She's going through a lot right now. But that's not your problem. You understand? None of this is your fault." Ruth nodded, but uncertainty lingered in her eyes. "Come on," Kevin said, standing. "Let's finish setting up your room. I think we've done enough for today." They spent the rest of the evening in Ruth's new space, arranging her books by color and putting up the posters she'd chosen at the store. They ordered pizza and watched a movie, something animated and light that made Ruth laugh. That night, after Ruth had gone to bed, Kevin sat on the back porch with a glass of water and stared out at the dark yard. Tomorrow he'd start working on the garden, clearing away the weeds and dead plants. Maybe plant some flowers. Ruth had mentioned she likes sunflowers. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You're a bastard. You know that. You're destroying a family." Kevin stared at the message for a moment, then blocked the number. He had no doubt there would be more. Judy would try to guilt him, threaten him, manipulate him however she could. She'd enlist friends and family to plead her case. She'd paint herself as the victim and Kevin as the villain. He didn't care, because Kevin had learned something important over 3 years in hostile territory. You don't win by playing by the rules of people who have no honor. You win by removing yourself from their game entirely. Judy's world was already collapsing, not because Kevin was actively destroying it, but because he'd simply stopped holding it up. Without him to manipulate, without Troy to provide the lifestyle she'd grown accustomed to, without Ruth to exploit, Judy was left with exactly what she'd built for herself, which was nothing. Over the next 3 months, Kevin watched it happen from a distance. Troy never came back. Kevin heard through the town grapevine that he'd moved 3 states over, working construction and keeping his head down. Smart man. Judy tried to rent an apartment in town, but was rejected by 3 different landlords. Kevin learned later that word had spread about the eviction and the custody case. Small towns had a way of protecting their own, and Judy had burned too many bridges. She eventually found a place on the outskirts of town, a rundown duplex with thin walls and a landlord who didn't ask questions. Kevin knew this because Ruth mentioned it after her first supervised visit. The social worker who'd accompanied her reported that the apartment was clean but sparse, and that Judy had spent most of the visit trying to convince Ruth to tell the judge she wanted to come home. Ruth had politely declined. The friends who'd surrounded Judy during her time with Troy disappeared one by one. Turned out most of them had been more interested in the parties and the lifestyle than in actual friendship. When the money stopped flowing, so did the invitations. Judy tried to reach out to her sister in Texas, but apparently that relationship had been damaged years ago by similar patterns of manipulation and deceit. The sister didn't return her calls. She got a job at a retail store in the mall, but it didn't last. Kevin heard from Mrs. Patterson that Judy had been let go after 3 weeks for attendance issues and conflicts with management. The real story, according to someone who worked there, was that Judy couldn't handle being told what to do and had gotten into a screaming match with her supervisor over scheduling. Through it all, Kevin received messages, some from Judy directly, others from numbers he didn't recognize but suspected were her friends or family members she'd convinced to intervene. You're destroying her life. She's your wife. Don't you have any compassion? Ruth needs her mother. This is cruel. You're going to regret this. Kevin deleted them all without responding. He'd learned long ago that people like Judy operated on a simple principle. If you engage, you lose. Every response, every acknowledgement, every moment of attention was fuel for their fire. The only winning move was to refuse to play. The final custody hearing was scheduled for mid-October, 3 months after the emergency ruling. Kevin and Jack Morrison prepared meticulously. They had statements from teachers, neighbors, and even some of Judy's former friends who'd witnessed her behavior. They had financial records showing Judy had drained nearly $30,000 from her joint account on luxury purchases while neglecting basic household expenses. They had Ruth's testimony, given carefully and gently in the judge's chambers. Judy's lawyer tried to argue that Kevin's military background made him unsuitable for full-time custody, that his work schedule would be unstable, that Ruth needed her mother. But the evidence was overwhelming. Judge Porter reviewed everything with the same stern efficiency she'd shown at the emergency hearing. Then she delivered her ruling. Mr. Rourke is granted full legal and physical custody of Ruth Rourke. Mrs. Rourke will be permitted supervised visitation twice monthly, with the possibility of unsupervised visitation pending completion of a parenting class and evaluation by a court-appointed psychologist. Child support will be determined based on Mrs. Rourke's current income and ability to pay. Judy didn't explode this time. She just sat there, staring at the table in front of her, her lawyer's hand on her arm in what might have been comfort or restraint. Kevin felt nothing. No triumph. No satisfaction. Just the cold certainty that he'd done exactly what needed to be done. Outside the courthouse, Jack shook Kevin's hand. That's as good as it gets. Clean win. Congratulations. Thanks for everything, Jack. You did the hard part. I just made sure the paperwork was right. Jack glanced back at the courthouse. She's going to appeal. You know that, right? Let her. It won't change anything. Jack smiled grimly. No, it won't. Kevin collected Ruth from where she'd been waiting with Mrs. Brennan. Ruth looked up at him with those wide, questioning eyes. Is it over? It's over. Ruth hugged him tight. Can we go home now? Yes, sweetheart. We can go home. Life settled into a new rhythm. Kevin took a job with a private security consulting firm that allowed him to work mostly from home, with occasional travel that he carefully scheduled around Ruth's school calendar. The pay was good enough to cover their expenses and start rebuilding their savings. Ruth returned to school with renewed energy. Her grades improved. She joined the art club and started bringing home drawings and paintings that Kevin hung on the refrigerator. She made friends. She smiled more. The dark circles under her eyes faded. They established routines. Breakfast together every morning. Homework at the kitchen table in the afternoons. Dinner as a family, just the two of them. Weekend projects in the yard, slowly transforming the neglected property into something beautiful. Kevin planted sunflowers along the fence line. Ruth helped him weed the garden beds. They put in a small vegetable patch with tomatoes and peppers and herbs. One Saturday in late November, they were raking leaves when Ruth said, "Dad." "Yeah." "Do you miss Mom?" Kevin stopped raking. He'd been expecting this question for months. He chose his words carefully. "No, I miss who I thought she was. But that person never existed. The real Judy was someone I didn't know at all." Ruth nodded slowly, processing this. "I used to think it was my fault, that if I'd just been better at chores, or quieter, or less in the way, she'd be nicer to me." Kevin dropped the rake and pulled Ruth into a hug. "None of that was ever true. You were never the problem. You're smart, kind, and you deserve so much better than what she gave you." Ruth cried a little, but it was the cleansing kind of tears, the kind that meant healing was happening slowly but surely. They finished the yard work as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Kevin made hot chocolate, and they sat on the back porch, wrapped in blankets, watching the first stars appear. "This is nice," Ruth said quietly. "Yeah, it is. I feel safe here. With you." Kevin squeezed her shoulder. "That's all I ever wanted." Later that night, after Ruth had gone to bed, Kevin received one final text from Judy's number. "I hope you're happy. You've ruined everything." Kevin stared at the message for a long moment. Then he typed a response, the only one he'd sent in 6 months. "I didn't ruin anything. I just stopped fixing your mistakes." He hit send, then blocked the number permanently. He didn't need Judy's anger or her attempts at manipulation. He didn't need her guilt trips or her accusations. He'd already won the only thing that mattered. Kevin went to check on Ruth one last time before bed. She was asleep, curled up with a stuffed animal he'd bought her last week. Her face was peaceful, relaxed, the face of a child who finally felt safe in her own home. Kevin stood in the doorway for a moment, just watching her breathe. Then he turned off the light and went to his own room. Tomorrow they'd wake up and do it all again. Breakfast, school, work, homework, dinner. The ordinary rhythms of a normal life. A life where Ruth would never have to kneel on a kitchen floor again. A life where she could just be a kid. And that, Kevin thought as he closed his eyes, was enough. More than enough. The first real snow of winter came in early December, coating Ashwood Springs in a pristine blanket of white. Kevin stood at the kitchen window, coffee in hand, watching Ruth build a snowman in the backyard. She'd bundled herself in layers of winter gear he'd bought at the start of the season, her cheeks pink from the cold, her laughter carrying through the glass. The house was warm now, truly warm, not just from the heating system Kevin had repaired and upgraded, but from something less tangible, something that felt like peace. The property had transformed over the past few months. The yard was neat and tended. The shutters were repaired and painted. The porch light worked. Inside, every room had been cleaned, repainted, and furnished with care. Ruth had helped choose new curtains for the living room. They'd picked out a comfortable couch together. The walls were decorated with Ruth's artwork and a few photos Kevin had framed. One photo in particular sat on the mantel. Kevin and Ruth at the beach, taken just last month during a weekend trip to the coast. Both of them smiling, genuinely happy, the ocean stretching out behind them. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Kevin set down his coffee and answered it to find Deputy Martinez on the porch, looking official but not particularly concerned. "Mr. Rourke, got a minute?" "Of course. Come in." Martinez stepped inside, brushing snow from his jacket. "I'll make this quick. I'm here as a courtesy more than anything. Judy Rourke filed a complaint yesterday, claiming you've been interfering with her court-mandated visitation." Kevin's expression didn't change. "That's not accurate. I figured as much. What's your side?" "She missed the last 2 scheduled visits. Didn't call, didn't show up, didn't notify the social services coordinator. When she did show up for the visit before that, she spent the entire hour trying to convince Ruth to lie to the court about wanting to live with her again. The supervising social worker documented everything." Martinez nodded, pulling out a small notepad. "Can you provide documentation?" "Absolutely." Kevin retrieved a folder from his desk and handed it to the deputy. Inside were copies of the visitation schedule, social worker reports, and time-stamped communications showing Judy's no-shows. Martinez flipped through the pages. "This is pretty clear. Looks like she's trying to flip the narrative. That's what she does. Well, her complaint isn't going anywhere. I'll file my report and close it out." Martinez handed back the folder. "How's Ruth doing?" "She's good. Really good. Glad to hear it." Martinez glanced out the window at Ruth, who was now attempting to lift a large snowball onto the snowman's midsection. "Kid looks happy." "She is." After Martinez left, Kevin returned to the window. Ruth had successfully placed the snowball and was now searching for stones to use as buttons. Kevin grabbed his jacket and went outside to help. "Dad, look how big I made him." "That's impressive. Need help with the head?" They worked together to complete the snowman, adding a carrot nose and stick arms. Ruth insisted on using one of Kevin's old baseball caps for a hat. When they finished, they stood back to admire their work, breath misting in the cold air. "Can we make snow angels?" Ruth asked. "Absolutely." They lay down in the fresh snow and swept their arms and legs, creating perfect angel shapes. Ruth laughed the entire time, the sound pure and unguarded. When they stood up to examine their angels, Ruth was right next to Kevin's, wings touching. "They're holding hands," she said. Kevin smiled. "Yeah, they are. Christmas came 2 weeks later. Kevin and Ruth decorated the house together, stringing lights along the porch and setting up a tree in the living room. Ruth made ornaments in art class, painted with careful detail. Kevin bought a few more at the store, trying to build a collection they'd add to each year. On Christmas morning, Ruth woke him up at 6 a.m., too excited to sleep any longer. They made pancakes together and opened presents in their pajamas. Kevin had gotten her art supplies, books, and a new bike she'd been admiring at the sporting goods store. Ruth gave him a framed drawing she'd made of their house, complete with the sunflowers in the garden and the two of them standing on the porch. "I love it," Kevin said, his throat tight. "I'll hang it in my office." They spent the afternoon at Jack Morrison's house for dinner. Jack and his wife had invited them over, along with a few other families Kevin had gotten to know through Ruth's school. It was warm and welcoming, full of laughter and good food. Ruth played with the other kids while the adults talked around the fireplace. At one point, Jack pulled Kevin aside. "You're doing good, Kevin. Really good. Just taking it one day at a time. That's all any of us can do." Jack raised his glass. "To new beginnings." Kevin clinked his glass against Jack's. "To new beginnings." The new year brought its own challenges. In January, Judy attempted to file for increased visitation rights, claiming she completed the court-ordered parenting classes and was ready for unsupervised visits. Jack Morrison fought it efficiently, pointing out that Judy had only attended 3 of the 8 required classes and had failed to complete the psychological evaluation. The request was denied. In February, Ruth had a bad week where nightmares from the past resurfaced. She woke up crying, talking about Troy yelling and her mother's cold silences. Kevin held her and talked her through it, reminding her that she was safe now, that those days were over. He also scheduled an appointment with a child therapist, someone the school counselor recommended. The therapy helped. Ruth started processing the trauma in healthy ways, through art and conversation and gradual healing. By March, the nightmares had mostly stopped. In April, spring arrived and Kevin and Ruth planted the garden together. They added more flowers this year, along with strawberries and snap peas. Ruth insisted on labeling everything with hand-painted signs. One afternoon while they worked in the garden, Ruth said, "I don't think I want to see Mom anymore." Kevin paused, trowel in hand. "What do you mean?" "The visits. I don't think I want to keep doing them. She just makes me feel bad about being happy here. She asks me all these questions about you, and if you've said anything about her. It's not fun. It's just stressful." Kevin set down the trowel and wiped his hands on his jeans. "That's a decision you can make. You're old enough now. If you want to stop the visits, we can talk to the judge about it. Would I have to see her in court again? Maybe, but I'd be there with you." Ruth thought about this for a moment, then nodded. "Okay, I want to stop." Jack filed the paperwork the following week. The hearing was brief. Judge Porter listened to Ruth's testimony, given privately in chambers, and made her decision within minutes. Given Ruth's age and maturity, and given that she has articulated clear and reasonable concerns about the emotional impact of these visits, I am suspending Mrs. Rourke's visitation rights indefinitely. Should Ruth choose to reinitiate contact in the future, the court can revisit this decision. Judy's lawyer protested, but Judge Porter was unmoved. "Your client has had multiple opportunities to demonstrate that she can prioritize her daughter's well-being over her own feelings. She has repeatedly failed to do so. This court will not force a child to endure visits that cause her distress." That was the last time Kevin saw Judy in person. Summer arrived with warm sunshine and long days. Kevin took time off from work, and he and Ruth went on a road trip, visiting national parks and small towns along the way. They hiked trails, ate ice cream at roadside stands, and stayed in modest motels where they'd swim in the pool until dark. Ruth took hundreds of photos on a disposable camera Kevin bought her. When they got the pictures developed, she made a scrapbook, carefully arranging each image with captions and decorations. "This was the best summer ever," she told him one night as they looked through the scrapbook together. "We'll have a lot more," Kevin promised. In August, they received notification that the divorce was finalized. Judy hadn't contested it. Kevin got the house, full custody of Ruth, and the majority of their remaining joint assets. Judy got her personal belongings and nothing more. Kevin filed the paperwork away without ceremony. It was just another piece of paper, another loose end tied off. Life moved forward. 1 year after Kevin had first walked through that door and found Ruth on her knees scrubbing floors, they were sitting on the back porch watching the sunset. The garden was in full bloom, sunflowers towering along the fence, vegetables ripening in neat rows. The house behind them was warm and inviting, lights glowing in the windows. Ruth had grown taller over the year. Her face had filled out, the sharp angles of malnutrition replaced by healthy curves. Her eyes were bright and clear. She smiled easily now, laughed often, and had a confidence Kevin hadn't seen since she was very young. "Dad," she said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Yeah. Thank you." "For what?" "For coming home. For getting me out of there. For everything." Kevin wrapped his arm around her. "You don't have to thank me for that." "I know, but I want to." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from orange to pink to deep purple. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. A car drove past on the street. The ordinary sounds of an ordinary evening in an ordinary town. But for Kevin and Ruth, it was anything but ordinary. It was peace. Hard-won and carefully maintained. It was safety, the kind that came from knowing you were exactly where you were supposed to be. It was home. Kevin thought about Judy sometimes, though not often. He heard through the grapevine that she'd moved to a different town, trying to start over somewhere she wasn't known. He heard she'd gotten another job, lost another job. He heard she'd tried dating again, but the relationships never lasted. He didn't wish her ill. He didn't wish her anything at all. She was simply gone from his life, like a chapter in a book that had been closed and shelved away. All that mattered now was the story he was writing with Ruth. A story about recovery and resilience. About the quiet strength it took to rebuild from rubble. About the simple, profound importance of showing up every single day and choosing to do better. "I love you, kiddo," Kevin said into the gathering dusk. "I love you too, Dad." The stars began to appear, one by one, pinpricks of light in the darkening sky. Kevin and Ruth stayed on the porch long after the sun had fully set, talking about nothing and everything, planning for tomorrow and next week and next year. And in that moment, Kevin realized something important. He hadn't destroyed Judy. He hadn't chased Troy. He hadn't used violence or cruelty or manipulation to win. He'd simply removed himself and Ruth from a toxic situation and built something better in the space that remained. Judy's world had collapsed, not because Kevin had torn it down, but because it had never been built on anything solid to begin with. Without someone to exploit, without someone to manipulate, without someone to hold up the illusion, it had simply fallen apart under its own weight. And that was justice enough. Kevin stood and stretched. "Come on, it's getting cold. Let's go inside." Ruth followed him into the house, the warmth and light welcoming them home. Behind them, the garden rustled in the evening breeze. The sunflowers stood tall and strong, their faces turned toward where the sun had been. Tomorrow they would bloom again, and so would Ruth, and so would Kevin. One ordinary, beautiful day at a time.